So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the CMMI, particularly our newest version, version 2.0, which we just released the first part of it last year in March, and we are now in the second iteration and on our third release. Part of the issues with the CMMI in the past is that it was often developed by essentially a committee of organizations, collecting best practices, putting it together, and then propagating it out to industry. The challenge with that is when you develop things by committee, it takes a long time to get a consensus and agreement and so forth. So we've kind of changed how we've approached things. So I'm going to cover for you today is essentially what is CMMI 2.0, how it's tied to what Frank was just saying on business performance and capability. And I'll talk a little bit, we'll get under the hood just a little bit to talk about how its best practices can be used both in affecting and improving your capability and performance, and also making your organization more flexible, more agile, et cetera. And then we'll talk a little bit, again, what Frank summarized very well. Actually, do you want to come up and do the presentation? We can go through that and talk about what the capabilities are around benchmarking and performance. So we define capability as basically anything an organization does well. It is tied directly and inexplicably to performance. So whatever your organization does for a living, whether it's products, services, what have you, what you're doing well are your capabilities. And what we're doing with the CMMI is recognizing if you're not improving both of those, you're actually getting left behind by your competitors, by your customers, et cetera. So I've seen a lot of presentations this week already on Agile. Any of you familiar with or have any certifications in Agile? Used Agile? Familiar with Agile? So I use the term big A and little a with that comes Agile. Little a in Agile is organizations just saying, well, let's throw all that documentation stuff and all the requirements and all the other stuff and just make things go faster. That's little a, and a lot of organizations have adopted Agile that way. I've actually developed products, working software that's still out there in industry right now using big A Agile, which is relatively disciplined, at least at the product and project level. However, Agile has had a challenge, and there's some techniques and methodologies out there that are emerging to help address that, but the challenge is around scalability. So some of these numbers that you see around having organizational approaches to things and capabilities, being able to monitor plans across an organization, not just at the project level, and measuring across the organization what matters, both big A and little a don't help you with that too much. It's really focused, again, on that project level. So what have we done with 2.0 and CMMI? In the past, CMMI was built, the history of the CMMI dates back to 1984. It was originally developed by Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. It was specifically addressing software as a problem. Software, when the DoD looked at it, what they did is they funded the SEI to create, under a FFRDC, federally funded research and development grant, to create this model of best practices known as the Software Capability Maturity Model. So a lot of organizations started adopting it, particularly defense contractors, big system integrators, et cetera. Dial forward, and what happened over the years is it would flip so that commercial organizations would recognize what those organizations were doing and the benefits they were gaining, and they would adopt it then. So we saw this happen throughout the world. The software CMM grew. Eventually it got merged into the SE, Systems Engineering CMM from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. And that's what we had then, CMMI 1.2, 1.1, 1.3, et cetera. That languished for close to 10 years. A lot of organizations have adopted it. A lot of them have used it to address their software and their systems. And there are two other approaches that were added to the model around services and acquisition or supplier management. The problem is that all the products of the previous CMMI group of things were all done in stovepipes. The SEI had a group doing training that was loosely connected with the people developing the model, that was loosely connected with people doing the appraisal methodology. And on this round circle that you see over here, there was very little paid attention to adoption guidance or how systems and tools could actually support it. So we broke all that. We literally went through and re-architected the entire product suite to what you see here now. So they were developed in an integrated fashion, like good software, good systems engineering is supposed to do. We built in performance capabilities to demonstrate the real true value and return on investment for implementing the model. And we added new content to it, Agile with Scrum guidance, other things around services and supplier management. The appraisal method works better now, and we actually reduced the footprint, the impact to the organization and projects on the appraisal methodology, so it's actually much more nimble, much more flexible in terms of how people can actually assess themselves, as Frank was saying. And lastly, it gives you the ability to pick and choose the content that means the most to your organization. It is not, and never will be going forward, a one-size-fits-all. Take away anything from today, the one thing I tell you about the CMMI is take away that you fit the model to your business, not the other way around. So how many of you are dealing with standards like ISO and that kind of thing? So ISO has very strict requirements around things like quality systems, et cetera, right? And typically it's there from a compliance purpose. There's a challenge with compliance, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. So the value proposition with 2.0 is to move from a process improvement model to performance so that there's actually real, tangible business results. We opened the architecture up so that we could actually include both scalability and the ability to accommodate other standards. So for example, if you adopt 2.0, you've already addressed most of ISO. And then as you move forward, other standards. When we were piloting this, for example, I had one organization I was working with, they were looking at 3 different standards, ISO 20000, 27000, and the new 2015 9000 standard, as well as CMMI for services level 3 and CMMI for development level 5. The organization that went through this successfully had one set of processes that were built on 2.0, and they passed all of their audits and appraisals with no additional effort whatsoever. They just basically said, this is how we do our work. Bring the audit on, we'll show you how we do our work. That's what we wanted to try and do with 2.0, and that's what we were achieving as we move forward. There's guidance now for the adoption, which I pointed out earlier. We have new practice areas and content. We've aligned everything with current best practices across industry. So, and then some of the biggest changes was around this last point on performance measurement. So you'll see throughout the model, and I'm going to show you a little bit under the hood here in just a minute, why and how that works in the model. So, other presentations I've been seeing this week are around transformational change, change management, organizational and operational excellence, and so forth. This graph on the left really depicts the way that the CMMI works the best in organizations. If you're missing any one of those vertical elements, whether it's a vision, skills, incentives, resources, or an action plan, you end up anywhere below that success line. So the CMMI now, with the adoption guidance and all the pieces that have it with 2.0, actually enables you to do this, and we've added an entire capability area around sustaining habit and persistence. Why should that matter? How many of you have been through organizations where they've been through a change, whether it's a tool, technology, organizational change, and the intents of the change and the benefits of the change don't stick? They don't last. Almost every organization I run into has that issue. And we think that part of the issue is because you don't hit head on how you govern your change management and how you ensure that you've put in the infrastructure to sustain it over time. So we hit that right between the running lights, and we've actually added a capability area and practice areas around that to give the best practices around that. So we're going to talk a little bit about performance and compliance. So here's the challenge, those ISO, any of those other standards out there. Over time, the tendency becomes to flip this pendulum or this balance towards compliance. Oh, we got an audit coming up, everybody get ready for the audit. We'll tell the auditor what they want to hear, and then we'll go back to doing what we do anyway, which is different than what we just told the auditor. That happens a lot. Or we're checking the box for the auditor. That's actually what we're doing, but it's actually causing so much overhead and rework for us that it's actually not adding value to how we actually develop our products or services. So at the risk of making Mr. Deming spin in his grave, what has happened, plan, do, check, act, has now become play the game, deflect the attention, check the box, and ache from the lack of results. So that is what we're trying to address straight on with the CMMI. And it goes back, if you look at this Harvard Review article, it was a really good article that came out and said if you're trying to innovate as an organization, innovation does not happen by chance. It doesn't happen haphazardly. It happens through discipline and intent. And what we've built into the model is the ability to give you both discipline and intent. Every one of our practice statements, every one of our practice areas has a clear and explicit intent statement behind it. So let's start looking under the hood a little bit. So as we look at this, this is one of our practice areas called estimating. So how your organization does estimating. Here's the intent statement. The purpose of doing this is to estimate the effort, duration, cost of the work and resources to develop and acquire or deliver the solution. So if I build a product, if I'm delivering a service, if I'm acquiring something from a supplier, this tells me I need to estimate how I'm doing that work. And then it gives you the best practices below it to tell you here's how it happens. So below that intent statement, you'll see this thing called a value statement. It says, why should I care about doing this particular practice area or practice? The value statement tells you that directly. Well, the purpose of doing that is to make sure that you actually deliver and meet your objectives for those products, services, etc. So it gives you the ability. ISO doesn't have this. Most of the other standards, NIST, what have you, do not have these performance value statements in them. We think it's one of the key distinguishers in the model that really sets it apart. What it does, if you think about it, is it moves you from a state of compliance to a state of, am I achieving performance and am I doing it actually well and better than I did before? So we talk about goodness now within the model. In addition, we've added as part of the appraisal process, so again, full product suite, we've added a performance report. This is required when you do registered appraisals with us. And that performance report tells the organization and the appraisal team exactly how well their performance is going. On whatever it is they care about, whatever their objectives are, the performance report gives them in one quick, small, short, easy place to go, a clear indication of where their performance problems are and their performance benefits and gains are. Now, the nice thing about that too, and one of the challenges that CMMI has had in the past, is that organizations would adopt the model, and because a lot of that information was proprietary, we as an institute couldn't actually report that out and do industry reports on benchmarking across different types of industries and so forth, because we didn't have access to the data. We finally were able to crack that nut with the performance report and these value statements by telling organizations, we don't need to know your proprietary data, we just need to know that you're improving in these areas, normalize and sanitize the data all day long, and yes, we give them guidance on how to do that, and then we get these reports. So we just started accepting our first version 2.0 benchmark appraisals in January of this year, and all indications are that the performance report is actually meeting its intent. We're getting really good, solid data out of there on how organizations are performing, and it's forming the basis for what we hope in the future will form basically an industry KPI database, so we can actually start reporting out, oh, in defense, here's how people perform in software against things like estimating or sustaining their habit or their governance or their estimating or their configuration management. So that performance report is actually building that infrastructure for us as we go based on real data from real organizations. These examples that you see in here, I know you can't read it. I'm showing you an example. If you want to come by afterwards, booth 27, Kevin and I will be glad to show you real examples. That's all real data from real companies. There's 2 software examples, there's a couple of services examples, and there's a hardware example in there. It's all real data, and it shows a clear indication. In many cases, those organizations use that performance report and realize that some of the key metrics that they were reporting, even things like profitability linked to how they were developing their products, were broken. And the performance report actually helped them to uncover it. So then let's go on to leveraging best practices. So this is the big picture right now, the model the way it currently states. If you talk about how do I do the work is basically provided or broken down into 4 categories for us. Doing the work, managing the work, enabling the work to be done better, and improving the work. And then we've broken those categories into these capability areas, so logical groupings of different things that you do. And then in the current state of the model, you see the list here of our practice areas. Service delivery management, strategic service management, under delivering and managing services, for example. Those are all current, they're sitting out there now, the model. We have a model viewer, we can certainly demo that for you later. So that's the other thing about the model, based on the feedback that we had from a lot of our customers who've used previous versions. It used to be in the form of a book. that SEI, Federally Funded Research and Development Center, created it, and the book was then available to the public for people to buy and use. They would come to either the SEI and now the CMI Institute to get certified in it, to learn how to use it and adopt it, but it was a book. And as a book, it became outdated the minute that industry changed. So what we've done with the model viewer is make it so that we can actually include new current content much more rapidly and push it out there for people to use. We're moving towards having that model viewer become a standalone application, like you'll be able to pull it up on your iPad. And we're also moving towards having it be, I'll say, crowdsourced of best practices. So if your organization develops a very, very slick and easy way to do configuration management on your software, we'll be able to let you promote that up through the model and make it available to other people and so forth. And we're working on how that's going to all work right now. So this hierarchy makes it about, think about it this way. I'm an organization doing whatever I do. Every organization in the world has a problem or a challenge in some place. There's a pain point somewhere. The number one question I ask when I go in as a lead appraiser, having been doing this now for close to 30 years, is to say, what's keeping you up at night, Mr. Manager, Mr. CEO, Mr. CIO, et cetera? There's always an answer to that question, every single time. No one struggles with that question. Typically, there's more than one thing. So wouldn't it be nice if I could take that pain point, or those pain points, and say, I can click on each one of these and tell you that there's a way to assess how bad that pain is, and also give you a way to fix it. That's what the model does. It gives you the ability to do that. So what we're doing with the model viewer is enabling that. So we've got information in terms of the adoption guidance to say, what are your pain points as your organization? What are the things that you care about most? What capabilities do you want to improve and perform better than anyone else? These are the targets then. We give you that, we promote that information and only that information, but it's presented in such a way that if you see that there's a thread tied to some other practice area or other capability, the model gives you the path to go there. So you choose what makes sense for your business. As I said at the beginning, fit the model to your business, not the other way around, like ISO and some of the other standards that are out there. And I am an ISO lead auditor, so I'm not trying to bash ISO. It's got its purpose and use. I think what we've done with the model, however, is actually built on that and taken it kind of to its next level. ISO is still struggling, I know, because I'm on the US tag for ISO 9000, struggling with developing standards by committee. Internationally, when you start doing that with multiple industries, it becomes even slower. The last release of 2015 of 9000 took close to 6 years to push out. So that's why we're trying to move this into a more rapid way. So the other thing we do, as Frank mentioned at the beginning, the ability to assess where you are in this path. It tells you whether, hey, I'm brand new at this, I'm a brand new organization. Start off at level 0, move up to level 1, move up to level 2. It gives you the ability to determine where you are and where you want to go in a very clear and straightforward path. You can move through this at an organizational project level all the way up to your enterprise level as you want to, up to level 5. So this platform enables you to know exactly where you are on that. And then example here, this is an example where we've actually built directly into the model. Anyone wanting to use Agile can look and pull up the information related to that particular practice and say, oh, when I'm doing my estimating in Agile, I have to worry about things like release planning, my backlog grooming, my sprint planning, execution, and my retrospective. How do I feed that into my processes? And then where do I assess that here? All this is now tied together in a very easy to follow path. So what's coming up next? We've been working with the Undersecretary of Defense, Jim Thompson, who's in charge of large system programs. He's got a budget of about $8 billion with about 205 of the large system integrators out there. And his challenge is, I can't distinguish it between my suppliers. They'll say they're level X this or level Y that, and yet they're still delivering software and systems that have defect rates, they miss their scheduled targets, they miss their cost targets. Those numbers don't mean anything to me. So we started talking to him about the performance report and the value statements, and he said, that's of value to us. That will actually help us out, distinguish between those suppliers. So the Department of Defense created this report. The Defense Sciences Board came out with it 2 years ago. It's been reviewed in 2018. In January of 2019, it goes into effect. It is now policy in the DoD. There are 7 recommendations in that report, And that report has, of those 7, CMMI currently directly addresses and helps you solve 6 of those 7 problems. Coming up soon, we're moving to the 7th one with DevSecOps after we move safety and security into the model. So you'll see here just some of the content. We have organizations that are doing, these are all the appraised organizations over time. This is how many organizations are now using Agile. And people are realizing, gee, I've implemented Agile using that little a approach, and the discipline that I thought was there is gone. I'm still overrunning my projects. I don't see how the big picture is. I can't scale it across my organization well. So CMMI is actually helping organizations do this one project at a time, one enterprise at a time. And it makes them both lighter, easier approaches. So again, easier and more flexible to implement. So when we created this information, we went out and talked to a lot of those organizations. We have a colleague, one of our partners here, who presented this morning that talked about it as well. Jeff Dalton, if you haven't seen his presentation, he's around this week as well, helped us with some of this information. What this does is, for those organizations who already adopted the CMMI or who have classic waterfall development methodologies for hardware systems or for services and so forth, what we've done is take Agile and build it in so it becomes agnostic to whatever you deliver. It doesn't matter if you're not delivering software. You can actually adopt Agile using the CMMI now for hardware, for services, for supplier management. And that's one of the beauties about and elegances of the model, that it brings that into play. And we're working on the DevOps content, as I said, right now, so that's coming soon. So I worked with NASA for a number of years. We're still working with them. They were one of our Next Gen, formerly called Next Gen, which is now 2.0. They were one of our sponsors. NASA, as you might have, over the years, has had challenges with things. Looking at this report, the report's listed down here in the bottom, these are the top 5 engineering root causes that they identified across the agency. In each case, the CMMI, we did this intentionally, you can probably put that together. We looked at each of those and said, how could we help NASA address things like shifting from the engineering hands-on, AKA little a, Agile, and excellence to insight and oversight. We're lacking ownership there at the project level, at the organization level. We have a solution for that in implementation infrastructure and the governance practice areas under our sustaining habit and persistence capability area. So again, multiple ways to address each of these. Normalization of deviances, not questioning what the anomalies are like. We have risk of opportunity management, causal analysis and resolution, continuity on being able to continue performance in services supplier. So in each case, we have directly answered. So now, DoD, Defense Sciences Board recommendations, NASA's issues, and if you look at the Agile Manifesto with its key areas, CMMI now addresses all 3 of those, directly or indirectly. So we'll talk a little bit about capability and how you assess that in our appraisals. So appraisals are broken down into 4 basic types. The most flexible is the one on the bottom here, called an evaluation appraisal. It basically says, I just want to go in and look at one project or one team and see how they're doing against the CMMI. So I could scale my appraisal to do that. If we were an organization, all of us in this room, we could do an appraisal on whatever it is we want to. We can flex the appraisal method to do that. Now, if I want to actually get a benchmark and get a rating from that, either capability or maturity level rating, I need to move up to the top and look at the benchmark. The validity period for that is 3 years, or 2 if the sponsor chooses to do that. And the reason for that is because our customers, our end customers, people buying from people who use the CMMI said, I want more insight more frequently, because 3 years is too long if an organization goes through a reorg or they have a merger and acquisition activity going on. I don't know that they're the same organization. I need to know that information. The appraisal methodology and the flexibility of the validity period gives you that ability now. And then if you're going through an appraisal, you have a target for that appraisal, you hit your target and decide, okay, I don't want to do 3 years, I want to do more frequent, I can go cut over to do a sustainment appraisal. So it's a more frequent but much lighter touch on the organization as you go through and do it. The impact is less, and during the pilot stages we were able to cut the appraisal footprint down by almost 1/3. So the overall cost of the appraisal, the overall impact on the organization projects has been greatly reduced. And then if you have a target, let's say you're going for maturity level 2, and there are 7 or 8 practices areas in there, and you get all of them to the target you want. Let's just say level 2 is what I said. Let's say you miss one, you get level 2. The action plan reappraisal basically lets you come back in a short period of time after fixing the issue and then get your rating after that. So it gives you the ability to do kind of a incremental appraisal to correct a mistake that you might have missed or overlooked in the previous version. So that's kind of it. The cost and duration fluctuates. Generally speaking, the benchmark is the most, I'll say, disciplined, most rigorous. So typically the cost there is on the scale here, the greatest. But even with what we have now with 2.0, what we're seeing is that in the pilots that we ran, we have significantly reduced appraisal cost, appraisal impact. Most of the impact of that cost, by the way, was from the organizations preparing for an appraisal. We've introduced a random generated sample size, an approach for that actually is helping them not have to second guess that as we go forward. So this nice thing about that is when we do that, they're actually seeing the results saying this actually isn't as painful and I don't have to do anything to prepare for the appraisal. Sort of like my example that I said at the beginning, it's like that organization using that 2.0 process infrastructure didn't have to prepare for any of those ISO or other audits. Now we're proving this out also for the last year. We're working with the FDA on the Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program, MDAP for short. This has been focused on class 1, 2, and 3 medical devices, which have still been over 30 years of auditing by the FDA. They still haven't actually moved the needle to make those better. And they're still causing patient injuries, death, et cetera. So what the FDA has done is by lifting certain regulatory requirements on these organizations who sign up, you have to be a good member in good standing, basically. By going through and demonstrating the FAA that you're willing to go through this program and improve your overall ability and capability, you get all that regulation waived. One of the companies doing that gave us a benchmark that it costs them $700,000 every year just to address letters of concern from the FDA. That all went away with this program. The FDA cares about them improving, not compliance, back to my Deming comment. So we have currently over 104 organizations or countries around the world with multiple organizations. This is the appraisal flow by phase. It's typically broken out into planning, conduct, and then reporting the results. And then that action plan reappraisal that I mentioned would be the 4th one. This is the adoption that we're seeing in 2018. We have 3,049 appraisals conducted in 2018. These numbers, while by themselves are not necessarily a great adoption, it's just showing that there is an adoption increase. We're also seeing people convert over to 2.0. We're seeing a lot more interest in 2.0. So essentially all the numbers on adoption that we can collect and show and demonstrate, like number of people who are being trained and certified and so forth, are all going up. So this is good news to us because typically when the CMMI goes out with a new release, there's usually a lag period. In this case, we're not seeing any lag period. It's quite the opposite. We're actually seeing a rapid adoption happen. So we're excited about that as we move forward. And that is just about the end of my appraisal. See, I am a lead appraiser, so it's sort of burned into my head. For 25 years, people have been using this. This is some regional insight of where the CMMI. China is one of our biggest growth market. There's a big explosion of software development going on in China. So they're using the CMMI all over the place. Similar with India, we're seeing some big growth there. But these are just a handful of example companies that have been using the CMMI. You see a lot of big names and big companies on there. There are also a lot of little companies out there. Kevin and I have both done appraisals on organizations as small as 5 people. So this model is now flexible to address any organization, any domain, pretty much any place you have. So that is me. Are there any questions? Any on things? Yeah?
Sure. So how do you drive model maturity and best practices into a self-directed team?
So that's a great question. There's content in the model that actually gives them guidance to do just that. So if they're self-directing, they have to be self-directing towards a goal, right? So it tells them, as you're moving towards that goal, here are some of the factors you need to think of in order to help you achieve that goal more effectively.
Are there, I looked at some of your reporting, are there reports that they can measure themselves on out of the model to evaluate their practices?
Yeah, so the practices themselves would be the first place. So if you look at the way the practices, there's an intent statement, there's a value statement, there's explanatory information, And then there are example work products and activities. So you would look at those and say, am I actually producing these? Am I doing those steps? And if the answer is no, it's sort of a bottoms-up review. If the answer is no, if I'm not hitting any of those targets, then they're example lists only at this point. But if you're not doing those, then you really can't draw the conclusion that you're meeting the intent of the practice either. So it gives them that ability to do that very quickly.
Yeah, so the conflict for us, right, is we've got governance here and execution here. And, by the time you find execution problems, right, it's only through governance and compliance. How do you get the team itself to be focused on its own maturity from a maturity perspective?
The best answer I can give you for that is that you give them, rather than say, the outcome of having the governance oversight is that you've checked a box, my plan, do, check, act, comment. You've actually improved your own performance. That is in almost every case I've ever seen, that sells itself to the project. Right. Gives them the ability to say, we actually got better. It didn't add overhead. It didn't add burden. We're not just checking a box for this other organization. We're actually better as a project team. And then when you see that, when you see the transformation, and you can almost physically watch it happen, their next response is, how do I get more of that? So that it's self-propagating at that point. Other questions? Yes, sir, Frank.
Are all the documentation still available online on all the details in the process that we do in advance?
Yes.
Audit? Okay, so everything you had there, we could download, we could look at, then we bring you in to actually perform the audit.
Yeah, now what's not in here are processes. These are practices.
Yeah.
How you do these practices is up to you.
Up to us, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a simple then mapping to say, how do you do this? And there's techniques, and we've actually got a tool in the model to help you do that, to be able to say, here's where it is. But in appraisal, we can do that simply by talking to people. You can just sit there and go through, and what we're working on is kind of a move towards a self-assessment. So it would be like, think of it, that model viewer that I showed you, being able to say, these are the things I care about, and then it asks you a handful of questions, and then you go, oh, this is the stuff that I need to know. And then you can map your processes to that.
Okay, and based on what we have on the audit, where we currently stand, do you have any ways to quantify if we moved up further what positive impacts could be based on our industry?
That's in the performance report. Okay. That's directly in the performance report. It comes out. Now we have an entire practice area, in addition, called measuring performance and measurement, or managing performance and measurement. Yeah. That also gives you information to say, monitor and measure your processes to determine how you're impacting performance and so forth. But also, that intent statement, remember, is coupled with the value statement. So when you're appraising, it is looking at, not only are you meeting the intent of the practice, but it's actually helping you do your job. Right. So that's built in there as well. So those are the real three hooks that really drive that in the model. Thank you for that question. And for yours, I think we're at time. There are no other questions. Thank you for your attendance today. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you.